Of any space flight is getting your patch designed so that 7 people are happy with it, and then the higher management to approve. Once that hurdle was over, it was easy from there. We're now headed out of the crew quarters at the Kennedy Space Center into the van that takes us to the pad. The main engines ignited and kept running on July 29th. And solids then lit 6 seconds after the main engines ignited. And when that happens, as you've heard many times, there's no doubt that you're on your way wherever those solids want to go.
One of the interesting things is a dramatic difference between the ride with the solids on and when the solids go away. It gets really quiet and smooth on those main engines.
But should have heard the Texas yells in the mid-deck when we got off the pad. Just excited, to say the least.
Out here, you really know you're going somewhere, but that's no threat, because that's what the business is all about.
We're on the solids for 2 minutes and 5 seconds to be exact, and there's a very noticeable decrease in acceleration as they start to burn out. There's a beautiful day down there, and it afforded the chance to get this is probably as good a shot of the solid rocket separation than as they fell on back toward the ocean that's ever been taken.
As a new guy, I was just starting to get comfortable here when one of those 3 little lights you're looking at went out.
And on board, there was no question that it had gone out. Whether you were on the mid-deck or flight deck, the cues were unmistakable.
Here we are in orbit, and we're taking a movie of the cargo before the payload bay door was opened. That first scene was that. And now the payload bay door is opening, and we're beginning to get our first view in good illumination of the IPS and all of the other beautiful instruments that were out there. And they were beautiful. When the sun shined on them, they were white and sparkling, and they had metallic surfaces that were aluminum and silver and sparkling in the sun.
Once those doors are open, you know you're going to stay a while, because the radiators are now out and the thermal control system will work.
All of the instruments operated through the keyboards that you see us operating right there, and presumably I was giving the instructions there for the IPS to begin its initial erection, and here we see the IPS coming up from its cradle, from its payload clamps, moving slowly up at about 1 degree per second toward a straight-up position. The first time that happened, it was a really beautiful sight.
Our major objective on the flight was testing of the instrument pointing system. So this was the first step in that process, and it happened early on the first day in orbit.
You can see here the beautiful glints and colors and things. The movie on the TV really doesn't do justice to the prettiness of that payload.
This illustrates one of the computer displays that helped us operate the instrument pointing system. This is the port side mission specialist station, which was the operating point for the IPS.
And this is sunset occurring on the IPS. You can see the red, white, and blue colors reflected off the surfaces. A phenomenal view.
Yeah, it was interesting. If there were clouds on the horizon, we'd get a red sunset on board, and if there weren't, if it was a clear horizon, then we'd get a white sunset.
And here's Gordon getting ready for one of the many burns with our smaller orbital maneuvering system rocket engines. Here you see us maneuvering Attitude and the small Attitude jets firing. We did an experiment so you could appreciate the acceleration we get out of these rocket engine firings. We put 8 ounces of water on the mid-deck, and here you see it traveling across. Dr. Bartow is catching it. We also tried to sleep through some of these burns, and we staged this next scene to show you what it felt like in the bunk.
That hurt.
No, it was a great train wreck.
Believe it or not, some of them slept through those once they got used to it.
This is an example of moving the arm around the orbiter. This kind of scene went on for about 12 hours. Some of it was kind of thrilling. We moved the PDP within a couple of feet of the orbiter windows, and I can tell you it looks awfully big when it gets that close to the cabin.
This is reminiscent for me of my first space flight on STS-3 when we had the same package on board, and I used the arm and did a lot of these same type of maneuvers, although they were looking for different kinds of data on this flight.
You want to watch this next scene, you'll see the booms deploy on the PDP, and it was important to get those out for the fly-around activity. There they come.
Once the booms were fully deployed, the wingspan was 9 to 10 feet from tip to tip.
This is a view through the commander's window. We stowed the PDP in a what we called a Solar 1 position, which was forward of the payload bay and over on the side, so it would be out of the way of the telescopes, and it was more thermally comfortable out there than it would be stowed in the payload bay. So it spent most of the mission just sitting out there.
Tony mentioned earlier that we were firing the electron generator during this period and stimulating the environment, and the PDP was actually measuring it. And so it was good fun. You know, you're actually doing active experiment on the environment up there.
Now we're come to probably the peak of excitement for the pilots of the on-orbital activities, and that's when we released the PDP, and it stayed absolutely stock still, just as it was supposed to, as Tony carefully let go of it and pulled the arm away.
I was in charge of taking the pictures at this point, but they wouldn't give me very much window space, so I had to squeeze in. It was pretty crowded time up there at this moment.
And John did an outstanding job. He really had a tough job getting these pictures, and everybody was surprised they came out so well.
I don't know if you've noticed, but the stability of the camera is improving as we get in the mission. That first picture, the payload bay door opening, was kind of jostly, but now we're getting some more skill at running these cameras.
After a few seconds making sure that everything looked good after release, I fired maneuvering jets carefully, and we eased away from it, and then spent the next 4 hours or so carefully maneuvering around the PDP, hitting these precise targets we mentioned earlier. And it was a sight, as you see here, with the Earth behind, or at night with the little lights out in the black sky, that we'll never forget.
Meanwhile, on the middeck,
It's known as a perfect stick.
The story's at it again.
I thought that was Gordo.
Story would be so anxious to do that, he'd get up in the middle of the night and set up all his gear, and you'd come out of your bunk, and there it was.
That's what they had to face when they wake up in the morning. If they didn't come out and get it, I'd jump
come in after.
had to be done before breakfast, which was really tough.
Now here I'm going to spin that stuff down, separate the cells from the plasma, and then put it in the freezer.
The centrifuge got more work out than just spinning up blood.
Story's not only an MD with a great bedside manner, but he's also a hotshot pilot, and this shows him flying the centrifuge in 0G. And 0G, it's indescribable what fun it is once you get used to it, but little devices like this, you can illustrate the principles of gyroscopic motion and things like that. It was just incredible.
I thought he was practicing to be a guru there.
I was looking for something to stabilize me most of the time.
Here's our commander. He was really fantastic, had some unique talents, and here he is demonstrating one, putting his pants on 2 legs at one time.
Anything in orbit tended to be interesting, sometimes frustrating, but Tony shows how much fun it was to shave in orbit.
Yeah, but he missed a whole bunch there. Just like same as this morning.
Our brave and honorable pilot was also a great chef. Could put those old plastic pouches in the oven with the best of them, get them out, and always had breakfast prepared for Carl and I, but he never was willing to serve it in bed. Here we have some Mexican scrambled eggs, which were scrambled eggs with some hot sauce on it, coffee, orange juice.
Sausage, I think.
Oh, yes, had some sausage. Sausage tended to flake up in little bits, and you had to chase them around the cabin to try to get your breakfast.
But it was good. It was good.
Yeah. I chased them while they ate.
So passing out the food trays.
Lauren had a special bottle of Louisiana red hot sauce on board, and actually several of us enjoyed it very much. Somehow or other, it illustrates the fact that tastes do change a little bit in orbit, and definitely in my case, and I think in most cases, there's a tendency to prefer spicier foods.
We're looking at some pine trees here, and this plant experiment was out of the University of Houston. So those are some local heroes you see there, and not only did we enjoy studying them, but they enjoyed being out in space too, and doing the same kind of things that we do up there.
However, along towards the end of the mission, we began to hanker for some fresh vegetables, and Story had to really guard his mung beans.
Mission Control saw probably 24 hours worth of downlink TV of the plant growth experiment, and later on in the mission sent us a teleprinter message, please, no more plant growth.
I gave them all the tender loving care they could use.
This is the Shuttle Amateur Radio Experiment, or SAREX. We were trying to do three things in SAREX. So one was to share scenes from on board with amateurs all over the world. The second one was to uplink video for the first time to any spacecraft. And the third one was to do two-way voice to particularly young folks clubs, Boy Scout troops, and that kind of thing. And all three objectives were met, and it was a lot of fun. And I hope that, from what I've heard, the people on the ground feel as positively about it as we did on board. I recruited almost everybody on board to be radio operators. There wasn't time for one person to do that, so I think they all deserve licenses now.
There's our guru here. This is Story doing his...
Demonstrating what happens if you ever drop a cat. It always ends up on its 4 feet, no matter what attitude. And that's
We've had a lot of discussions about how this works, how you can move around.
He's not shoveling the air. It's actually, he's
You want me to do it here?
The one on the right, of course, is a magnet, and the one on the left is just a pencil, and we had no idea they were going to decide to mate.
We're still waiting the results.
Gordo practicing his landing technique, get ready for re-entry. Looks like we're lost in space there.
That's right. Well, we get up in the morning and, you know, brush our teeth and comb our hair and the rest of that stuff here.
Some of the crew equipment we had was limited, so we had to share it.
You're not allowed to laugh.
This sequence we call Hair Wars.
As you might expect, the commander won.
Of course. I'm not dumb enough to get the hairbrush away from the commander.
This next scene is not staged. This is a real teleprinter message.
We set a new record on this flight for the amount of teleprinter messages sent up. Every single rev on the night side, they send up a new detailed plan for the scientists here to accomplish on the next solar pass. And that was an actual message, all full of fine print. But fortunately for me, all I had to do is take it up to the upper deck and pass it out to the people who really had to read it.
We recorded a new space first on this flight. We ran out of teleprinter paper after 5.5 days. It's the first time that's happened. And Story Musgrave changed out the paper roll in space for the first time.
But the hairbrush one wasn't staged either.
The way those messages were used, we would cut them up, and you see bits of them tacked all around the orbiter cabin there. We refer to whatever section we needed to at the time to sit down and send our commands from those, what we call the data display units.
Here Lauren is using 0G to help him get another one of his many checklists. And you see me gliding up from the middeck, bringing some equipment up and checking on the next maneuver. They were relentless. Also consulting our personal computer, which you see installed on top of the glare shield between the windows. This was a real friend in space. It had a world map mode, which showed us exactly where we were above the Earth. Also told us when our next communication site was coming up and how long it would be. Helped us keep track of sunrise and sunset, which was kind of the driving force on this particular mission. And we also used a special program for our crew control free drift to help the solar pointing.
Another thing that Roy did that the red team really profited from, he looked after Carl and I and made sure we didn't miss any steps. So we'd always count on Roy to keep an eye on us, keep an eye on the checklist, because there was so much going on, it was indeed possible to miss steps.
You're watching the windshield wiper action of the infrared telescope, which was always sweeping back and forth when you look out.
Trying to miss the moon, which we're here zooming in on.
No, we're not trying to miss it. We're getting ready for another blood draw.
And the X-ray telescope, here static, as it's found its target and locked on to one of the several targets that they did detailed studies on throughout the flight.
This is an astonishing view of one of the sunrises. Just absolutely unbelievable to watch the red, white, and blue stripes across the horizon every 90 minutes.
We're going so fast, that's just how fast they occur. Just like someone turned the lights on or turned them off, and you get, of course, the sunset, sunrise every hour and a half.
This is what the sunrise looked like on the IPS itself. You can see the red, white, and blue colors as they pass.
We're privileged to see some 126 of those sunrises on this flight.
And that was the signal that it was time to get busy on the aft flight deck, get ready to acquire the sun, and start doing the solar observing. By the end of the mission, we had got to the place that we could acquire the sun and get the experiments operational in about 5 minutes, which was sort of 5 minutes faster than our worst estimates pre-launch. There's a high moment. We have solar images from both telescopes, Experiment 10 and Experiment 8, on the TV at one time. We're finally up and running with a full-bore set of instruments. And I have to tell you that that was a high point for me, because I'm from Lockheed, and it's the Lockheed experiment that took so long to come back to life. Now, this scene is the moment of truth. That sunspot is bouncing around because that's about the stability of the IPS. At that instant, you saw the sunspot become stable and solid, which is when our internal guider locked on the sun, and the real good science for that instrument started at that moment. So it was a happy time, and from then on we knew that we were not going to be judged too harshly, because we got some science for at least everybody.
We just have to show you one more sunset on the IPS. We couldn't resist.
This is the final sunset, and we stowed and put it to bed and got ready for entry on the 8th day. I've got my launch and entry helmet on now, and Tony took this picture. You can barely see the Earth going by at Mach 25 out the window. Now we've gotten down to what we call the heading alignment circle, the final 270-degree turn we made to the right, which unfortunately for me let me see only blue sky, and Roy had the view of where we were and how we were doing.
Yeah, he kept asking how it was going, and it looked great to me. I couldn't figure out why he was disturbed.
But as we came around on final and rolled out, there it was, runway 23 right in front where it should be. And we were right on the glide slope we should have been on, so things couldn't have looked better. It was a clear but very warm day, some 105 degrees out on the lake bed.
There I am doing my primary duty on the flight, getting the gear down, which we're very happy to report came down successfully on time.
It got down low, about 10 feet above the ground here, and we were still a little fast, so it flew for some time at 10 feet, waiting for the speed to bleed off to the proper touchdown speed.
And the touchdown was very smooth.
We got the nose down right away. The nose on the orbiter comes down firmly. Nobody had any doubt when the nose came down, although it wasn't alarming. And then we went into our braking profile as planned, which essentially let the airplane coast until we were down to 130 knots. Then applied the brakes moderately hard to stopped the airplane, and we used up a total from the end of the runway of about 12,000 feet, a little over 2 miles.
First view in good illumination of the IPS and all of the other beautiful instruments that were out there. And they were beautiful. When the sun shined on them, they were white and sparkling, and they had metallic surfaces that were aluminum and silver and sparkling in the sun.
Once those doors are open, you know you're going to stay a while because the radiators are now out and the thermal control system will work.
All of the instruments operated through the keyboards that you see us operating right there, and presumably I was giving the instructions there for the IPS to begin its initial erection. And
Full day down there, and afforded the chance to get this is probably as good a shot of the solid rocket separation and as they fell on back toward the ocean that's ever been taken.
As a new guy, I was just starting to get comfortable here when one of those 3 little lights you're looking at went out.
And on board, there was no question that it had gone out. Whether you were on the mid-deck or flight deck, the cues were unmistakable.
here we are in orbit, and we're taking a movie of the cargo before the payload bay door was opened. That first scene was that. And now the payload bay door is opening, and we're beginning to get our... Here we see the IPS coming up from its cradle, from its payload clamps, moving slowly up at about 1 degree per second toward a straight-up position. The first time that happened, it was a really beautiful sight.
Our major objective on the flight was testing of the instrument pointing system. So this was the first step in that process, and happened early on the first day in orbit.
You can see here the beautiful glints and colors and things. The movie on the TV really doesn't do justice to the prettiness of that payload.
This illustrates one of the computer...
Of any space flight is getting your patch designed so that 7 people are happy with it, and then the higher management to approve. Once that hurdle was over, it was easy from there. We're now headed out of the crew quarters at the Kennedy Space Center into the van that takes us to the pad. The main engines ignited and kept running on July 29th. And solids then lit 6 seconds after the main engines ignited. And when that happens, as you've heard many times, there's no doubt that you're on your way wherever those solids want to go.
One of the interesting things is a dramatic difference between the ride with the solids on and when the solids go away. It gets really quiet and smooth on those main engines.
But should have heard the Texas yells in the mid-deck when got off the pad. Just excited, to say the least.
Out here, you really know you're going somewhere, but that's no threat, because that's what the business is all about.
We're on the solids for 2 minutes and 5 seconds, to be exact. And there's a very noticeable decrease in acceleration as they start to burn out. There's a beautiful